My husband left me stranded in the pouring rain, 42 miles from our front door. He said I needed to be taught a lesson. I didn't argue with him. I just stood there, watching his car vanish into the distance. A few moments later, a black Chevy pulled up. My security, my brother, got out, calm and ready. I managed a small smile as I climbed in. Richard's reign of cruelty was over. He had just made his last fatal mistake. I pressed the record button on my phone, sliding it into the deep pocket of my coat as Richard's BMW coasted into the desolate rest area. The storm hadn't broken yet, but you could smell the ozone on the wind. "Get out," he commanded, leaving the engine running. "You need a lesson, Clara. Maybe a long walk home will teach you some respect." 42 miles. He had calculated it with precision, far enough to be outside any Uber's service area and in a complete dead zone for public transportation. What he couldn't possibly know was that I had been meticulously documenting his every move for the past 8 months. My brother, Leo, was already parked out of view, concealed behind the boarded-up shell of a gas station, waiting for my signal. The expensive leather of the passenger seat protested as I turned to face him. Richard's jaw was set in that tight, self-righteous way it always was after he closed a particularly ruthless deal at his hedge fund. Just 3 hours ago, we had been at Gibson's Steakhouse, raising a glass to our anniversary. Now he was abandoning me on a deserted highway because I dared to ask where $15,000 from our joint account had gone. "You're really doing this?" I kept my voice steady, ensuring my phone's microphone would capture the ice in his every word. "Actions have consequences, Clara. You went behind my back." My thoughts flashed to the single pearl earring I'd found under our bed 2 days ago. It belonged to Chloe, his assistant. That $15,000 had likely paid for a matching necklace. I kept silent about that, though. Not yet. Everything had to happen in the correct sequence, just as Leo and I had rehearsed. "It's about to pour," I said, gesturing toward the sky, which was rapidly turning a bruised purple. "Then you'd better start walking," he replied. His fingers drummed a frantic, impatient rhythm on the steering wheel. "Unless you're prepared to apologize this instant and admit you were out of line. Before this story goes any further, I just want to say thank you for being here to listen. If you agree that no one should ever be left behind in a storm, whether a literal one or a metaphorical one, please consider subscribing. It doesn't cost a thing, and it helps make sure these stories can find their way to others who might need to hear them. 6 months ago, I would have apologized. 6 months ago, I was still desperately clinging to the hope that our marriage could be saved. That was before I found the second set of books for his company, before the mysterious withdrawals became a recurring pattern, and before I understood that he was systematically siphoning our shared assets into accounts only he could control. The moment I started asking questions, his cruelty began. Tonight was his attempt to escalate his control, but it was also his final undoing. "I'll walk," I said, pushing the car door open. "Good choice. Perhaps by the time you get home, you'll have remembered your place." I stepped out onto the cracked asphalt choked with weeds. The rest stop was a ghost, abandoned for what looked like decades, its main building a dark, menacing shape with plywood nailed over the windows. Richard had chosen this location deliberately. He'd made a remark about it last week as we drove past. "Imagine being stranded out here," he'd said with a smirk, "miles from civilization." That was the moment I knew what he was planning. The BMW's engine roared to life. Through the passenger window, I saw him glance at his phone, probably sending a quick text to Chloe to let her know the deed was done. And then he was gone, his tires making a faint screech on the weathered pavement, leaving me completely alone in the growing darkness. I counted to 60, watching his taillights disappear around a bend in the highway. Then, with calm, steady steps, I walked toward the derelict gas station where Leo's black Chevy was hidden. My brother emerged from the car holding an umbrella and a thermos. "Did you get it all?" he asked. Every last word, I confirmed, pulling out my phone and stopping the recording. He actually told me to remember my place. Leo just shook his head, his face a mask of disgust. 3 years of watching him manipulate you, I thought that was as bad as it could get. But this, he gestured at the bleak, empty lot around us. This is criminal. Sophia is going to have a field day with this recording. I accepted the thermos of coffee, grateful for the warmth that seeped into my chilled hands. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, splattering against the concrete. In the morning, Richard would be expecting me to have spent the night slogging through a thunderstorm, broken and utterly humiliated. He would be picturing me huddled on our front porch, desperate to beg for his forgiveness. "Is Isabel ready?" I asked. "She's been monitoring the accounts all night." The moment he moved that $15,000 this afternoon, she documented it. The complete forensic audit goes back 2 years. He's been funneling money into offshore accounts in the Bahamas, probably setting himself up to divorce you once he'd drained enough of your assets. And Sophia? She's filing the emergency motions at 9 a.m. sharp. Abandonment, financial abuse, fraud. She says with tonight's recording on top of everything else we've gathered, he won't know what hit him. We climbed into Leo's truck just as the sky opened up, rain hammering against the windshield. I imagined Richard driving home, feeling smug about his cruel lesson, probably pouring a celebratory scotch to toast putting his wife back in line. He had no idea that 8 months ago, the instant I first suspected he was hiding money, I had assembled my own team. Leo had installed a new set of high-tech cameras throughout our house, disguised as a simple security system upgrade. Isabel, a forensic accountant who specialized in cases of financial abuse, had been meticulously tracing every single penny. And Sophia, one of Chicago's most formidable divorce attorneys, had been compiling a case file that now filled 3 entire boxes. "The house recordings just finished uploading," Leo said, glancing at his phone. "We've got him on video from last Tuesday bringing Chloe over while you were visiting your mother. They were in your bed." A cold, hard feeling settled deep in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak. That emotion had died months ago. This was pure resolve, as sharp and clear as crystal. "He's been planning this for a long time," I said. "The escalation, the financial control, isolating me from my friends. It's a classic pattern of abuse. Sophia says judges don't look kindly on husbands who abandon their wives on the highway as a form of punishment." Leo drove carefully through the downpour, sticking to back roads to eliminate any chance of Richard spotting us. We had planned this route weeks ago, even doing a few practice runs. Every single detail had been considered. The hotel room was booked under my maiden name, paid for with cash that Leo had withdrawn in small increments over the past 2 months. The clothes I would need were already there, stashed in the closet, along with copies of all our documentation. "You realize he'll start looking for you when you don't come home tonight," Leo said. "Let him. The hotel security footage will show me checking in by myself, soaking wet and looking traumatized. The front desk clerk will give a statement about how I could barely speak through my sobs. Sophia coached me on the exact script, what to say and how to act. The rain intensified as we neared the city. Richard would be home by now, probably enjoying his second drink, maybe calling Chloe to brag about how he'd taught me a lesson. Tomorrow, he would wake up expecting my surrender. Instead, he would find his assets frozen, his office passkey deactivated, and federal investigators waiting to talk to him about the irregularities Isabel had discovered in his hedge fund's books. "Are you ready for this?" Leo asked as the hotel lights appeared through the rain-streaked windshield. I thought about the woman I was 3 years ago, independent, successful, confident, before Richard had systematically taken my life apart piece by piece. I thought about the recording on my phone, his cold, dismissive voice telling me to get out and walk 42 miles in a storm. I thought about Chloe's earring and the drained bank accounts and the secret prenup he thought I didn't know about, which would have left me with absolutely nothing. "I've been ready for 8 months, I said. He just handed me the last piece of evidence I needed. Leo pulled up to the hotel's side entrance. I grabbed the small overnight bag we'd packed, just enough to look like I'd fled with nothing, and stepped out into the storm. It was time to perform the role of the terrified, abandoned wife. Tomorrow, Richard would finally learn who was really in need of a lesson. The hotel lobby was blindingly bright after the darkness outside. Water dripped from my hair, creating a small puddle on the polished marble floor as I made my way to the front desk, making sure my hands were shaking just enough to seem convincing. The night clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, saw me and immediately grabbed a stack of fresh towels. "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" she exclaimed, rushing from behind the counter to wrap a towel around my shoulders. "My husband," I managed to say, letting my voice crack convincingly. He left me at a rest stop in this storm. I had to walk for miles before a kind stranger helped me. Her expression shifted from simple concern to outright horror. Perfect. Every detail of this would be logged in the hotel's incident report, exactly as Sophia had planned. The clerk led me to a comfortable chair and brought me hot tea while she processed my check-in. I gave her my maiden name, Clara Vance, and paid with the emergency credit card I'd opened 6 months ago, the one Richard had no knowledge of. Room 412 was modest but clean, with a view of the city lights blurred by the relentless rain. I locked the door, slid the chain across, and for the first time in hours, allowed myself a real, deep breath. Then I took out my second phone, the burner Leo had given me, and replayed the recording from the car. Richard's voice, cold and measured, filled the quiet room. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Calling my accountant behind my back, asking all these questions about our finances like you could possibly understand the answers. Then my own voice, carefully controlled. "It's our money, Richard. I have a right to know where it's going." "Our money?" His laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. "I earn it. I manage it. You spend it on overpriced groceries and those absurd charity luncheons. $70 on organic kale last week, Clara. $70. I remembered that shopping trip. I'd been buying ingredients for a dinner party he had insisted we host for his clients. The very same dinner where he'd spent $800 on wine without a second thought. The recording played on. "You humiliated me at the Morrisons' party, contradicting me about the European markets in front of my colleagues. Where do you even get those ideas? Some morning news show? I have an MBA from Kellogg, Richard. I worked in financial services for 5 years before we met. Before I saved you from that dead-end career, you mean? You were analyzing penny stocks at some third-rate firm. I gave you a life you could only have dreamed of on your own." I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember the woman I was at Henderson Investments. I wasn't analyzing penny stocks. I was managing a $30 million portfolio. But Richard had rewritten our history so many times that sometimes even I started to forget the truth. My phone vibrated, a text from Leo. Isabel found something big, 3 more accounts in the Bahamas. He's been moving money for 18 months. 18 months. I cast my mind back to when things really began to shift. The sudden insistence on separate checking accounts, supposedly for tax purposes. The new financial advisor who just appeared one day. The stack of documents he'd asked me to sign without reading because it's just routine stuff, babe, trust me. Another text pinged, this one from Sophia. Judge Vance has agreed to an emergency hearing tomorrow at 2 p.m. Bring the recording. Judge Eleanor Vance was known for seeing right through men like Richard. She'd presided over 3 major financial abuse cases in the last year, all of which had ended with massive judgments for the wives. Sophia had specifically timed our filing to land in her court. I changed into the dry clothes from the emergency bag I'd stashed here the day before, then sat down at the small desk and started to write. Not the official statement Sophia would help me craft for the court, but notes for myself, a way to remember who I was beneath the persona Richard had tried to build for me. I wrote about the promotion I'd declined because Richard said the travel would put too much strain on our new marriage. The investment opportunity I'd identified that would have tripled my personal savings, back when I still had personal savings. The friendship with my college roommate that slowly died after Richard convinced me she was just jealous of our happiness. My phone rang. Richard's ringtone. I let it go to voicemail, then played the message on speaker, recording it with my burner phone. Clara, this is getting ridiculous. It's been 3 hours. Lesson learned, okay? Call me back and I'll come pick you up. Don't make this any worse than it has to be. 10 minutes later, another call. His voice was harder this time. I know you have your phone. Stop acting like a child and call me. If you're trying to make me worry, it's not working. I'm going to bed. You can figure out your own way home. But I could hear the faint edge of panic creeping in. He was starting to sense that something was wrong. In the past, I would have called by now, weeping and apologetic, ready to crawl back. My silence was breaking his script. At midnight, Chloe called. I almost didn't recognize the number, but a gut feeling made me answer and stay silent. Hello? Clara? Her voice was hesitant. Richard asked me to call you. He's worried. He said you two had a disagreement and you're not picking up. He wants you to know he's sorry and that you should come home. Richard never apologized. He never admitted he was wrong. The fact that he'd sent his mistress to deliver a fabricated apology told me just how rattled he was. I hung up without a word. By 1 a.m, the calls were coming every 15 minutes. Richard, his mother Eleanor, even his business partner James. I documented each one, the number, the time, the increasingly frantic voicemails. The abandoned wife was supposed to be desperate to be rescued, not maintaining complete radio silence. I ordered room service, charging it to the card. Soup, a salad, and a glass of wine. Let the receipt prove I was composed enough to eat. Let it document that I wasn't falling to pieces as Richard had intended. At 2:30 a.m., a text came through that brought a smile to my face. It wasn't from Richard, but from our neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Saw Richard in your driveway with a flashlight looking under your car. Then he sped off. Is everything okay? He was looking for my car, not realizing Leo had moved it to a long-term parking garage across town 2 days ago. It was another piece of evidence showing I'd been planning to leave, that his act of abandonment had merely pushed up my timeline. I drew back the curtains and watched the storm raging over the city. Somewhere out there, Richard was beginning to understand that his perfectly controlled universe was crumbling. He thought he'd taught me a lesson about power and my place in his world. Tomorrow, when the stock market opened and he found his offshore accounts frozen, when his key card was denied at his office, when federal investigators showed up asking about the discrepancies Isabel had uncovered, he would learn who had really been doing the teaching. The rain hammered against the window as if trying to break in. 8 months of careful planning, of documenting his every move, of playing the part of the submissive wife while building a case that would utterly dismantle him. It all led to this moment, this perfect storm, entirely of his own making. I set my alarm for 7, knowing I'd need to look suitably distressed for the emergency hearing. Sophia would meet me at noon to prepare. But for now, for these few precious hours, I sat in the darkness and felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Freedom. The morning sun sliced through the hotel curtains at 7 on the dot, but I'd been up since 5, sitting at the desk with my laptop open to our joint checking account. The balance was exactly what I'd anticipated. Richard had already wired another $20,000 out at 6:47 a.m. He was panicking, trying to move assets before I could touch them. He was too late. Isabel had already documented everything. By noon, my hotel suite had been converted into a war room. Isabel arrived first, rolling in 2 suitcases filled with printed files, her normally flawless makeup slightly smudged from a sleepless night. She methodically laid everything out across the dining table: bank statements, wire transfers, and brokerage reports. The Bahamian accounts were frozen as of 9 o'clock this morning, she announced, pulling up a spreadsheet on her laptop. Richard tried to access them at dawn. 3 failed attempts. He's probably tearing his office apart right now. Sophia swept in next, her phone glued to her ear. speaking in rapid-fire legal jargon I could barely follow. She finished the call and faced me with a look of grim triumph. Judge Vance moved our hearing up to 1 o'clock. She wants to handle this immediately. Also, Richard hired Julian Croft. The shark, Leo said, entering with a box of surveillance gear. The same lawyer who got that pharma CEO acquitted last year. Croft doesn't work for cheap. Richard must have liquidated something big to get him on retainer. A flicker of anxiety went through me, but Sophia placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Croft is good, but he can't argue with video evidence and financial records. Besides, he's coming into this completely blind. We've had 8 months to prepare. Leo connected his laptop to the suite's large television and brought up the surveillance footage from our house. I've put together the highlights, if you can call them that. Just a warning, Clara, this won't be easy to watch. The first clip showed Richard in his study at 2 a.m. 3 weeks ago. I'd been upstairs, fast asleep, knocked out by the sleeping pills he'd recently started suggesting I take for my anxiety. On the screen, Richard was carefully photographing documents from our safe, then putting them back in the exact same order. The papers were our joint investment portfolios, my mother's power of attorney forms, and the deed to the lake house my grandmother had left to me. He was building a duplicate file, Isabel explained, creating forgeries with tiny alterations. If you hadn't caught this, he could have slowly replaced the real documents with fakes. The next clip was even worse. It was Richard and Chloe in our living room 2 months prior, on a night he'd told me he was at a client dinner. She was lounging in my robe, the silk one from our honeymoon in Paris. They were laughing at something on his phone. "Turn up the sound," I said, my stomach churning. Richard's voice echoed through the room. She actually bought it when I said the conference was mandatory. I've trained her so well. A few more months and I'll have everything moved. Then we can finally end this whole charade. Chloe's giggle was like nails on a chalkboard. And the prenup really says she gets nothing? The prenup is irrelevant. She'll never contest it. Clara doesn't have the backbone. By the time she figures out what's happened, we'll be in Costa Rica, and she'll be too broken to even think about fighting. Leo paused the video. The room was deathly silent, save for the hum of the hotel's air conditioning. I got up, walked over to the window, and looked down at the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, Richard was likely in his office, frantically trying to figure out why his computer access had been revoked, why his assistant couldn't reach the bank, and why his entire world was suddenly imploding. "There's more," Leo said softly. "Do you want to see it?" I just nodded. The next clip showed Richard on the phone in our garage, pacing anxiously between our cars. The timestamp indicated it was last Tuesday, while I was at my book club. "Jessica has been perfect," he was saying. "She has no clue I'm recording our talks. Every little detail about Clara's mother's estate, the Alzheimer's diagnosis they're trying to hide, the trust fund from their father. It's worth nearly $2 million, and Clara doesn't even know it's there." My knees felt weak. Jessica, my younger sister, the one I'd been protecting from her gambling addiction for years, the one I'd covered for with our parents more times than I could count. She'd been feeding Richard information about our family, about money I didn't even know existed. "When did he first contact her?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. Isabel pulled up the phone records. First contact was 13 months ago. Regular calls started 10 months ago, always when you were out of the house. He's been paying off her debts in exchange for information. Sophia glanced at her watch. "We have to leave for the courthouse in 30 minutes. Clara, are you ready for this? To see him today?" I turned back from the window. "Show me the rest of it. I need to see everything." Leo clicked to another folder. "These are from his office computer. I had a contact in his IT department pull them just before his access was terminated this morning." The screen displayed a chain of emails between Richard and his attorney, dated 6 months back. The subject line read, "Project Fresh Start." The emails contained detailed strategies for divorcing me, including psychological tactics to make me question my own sanity, financial maneuvers to leave me penniless, and even suggestions for gradually escalating emotional abuse to make me more compliant during the legal proceedings. One line leapt out at me. The key is to make her believe she is going crazy, gaslight consistently, hide things, deny conversations, contradict her memories. By the time we file, she'll be too unstable to be a credible witness. I thought of all the times over the past year Richard had told me I was misremembering. The dinner reservation I was sure I'd made that he swore I never told him about. The conversation about visiting my parents that he claimed never happened. The jewelry that would vanish, only to reappear in the most bizarre places. I'd started secretly writing things down, genuinely thinking I was losing my mind. He was using a playbook, Sophia said, her voice filled with contempt. This attorney, Douglas Stern, he specializes in high-net-worth divorces where one spouse aims to leave the other with nothing. He's currently under investigation by the Bar Association for ethics violations. Isabel brought up one final document. This is what triggered our emergency filing this morning. Richard transferred $3.2 million from his hedge fund's client accounts into a personal account in Panama yesterday afternoon, right before he left you at the rest stop. He must have thought he had more time before anyone would notice. He was running, I said, the full picture, finally locking into place. The abandonment wasn't just about controlling me. He knew the walls were closing in. The SEC received an anonymous tip yesterday morning, Sophia said with a faint smile, about certain irregularities in his fund's reporting. I looked at her. You? Isabel, actually. Once she had documented the embezzlement, we had a legal obligation to report it. The sheer scale of Richard's crimes was staggering. This went far beyond our marriage or his affair. He was a criminal who had used me as a shield while he plundered his clients' accounts and plotted his escape. The man I had shared a bed with for 3 years was capable of destroying not just me, but dozens of innocent investors who had trusted him with their life savings. Judge Vance needs to see all of this, I said, my voice gaining strength. Every document, every recording, every single piece of evidence. Sophia smiled, the kind of smile that made it clear why she had never lost a financial abuse case. Oh, she'll see it all. And then Richard Croft is going to find out what it really feels like to lose everything. The courthouse corridors were all marble and mahogany, built to inspire awe and intimidation. I walked through them in my most formidable suit, a navy one Richard had never laid eyes on because I'd bought it last month for this exact day. Sophia was at my side, briefcase in hand, while Leo flanked my other side like a protective shadow. We walked into courtroom 4B at precisely 12:55 p.m. Richard was already there, sitting next to Julian Croft, whose $1,000 haircut couldn't conceal the deep stress lines forming around his eyes. Richard seemed smaller somehow, his usual commanding aura diminished. His clothes were wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He'd clearly spent the night in his office. When he saw me, his expression contorted from exhaustion into pure, unadulterated rage. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Eleanor Vance entered, her black robes lending an extra layer of gravity to the already tense room. She settled into her chair and immediately began to scan the documents before her, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "We are here today for an emergency petition filed by Clara Mitchell regarding marital assets and spousal abandonment," she began, her voice resonating with the authority of someone who had seen it all. "Mr. Croft, I understand you were just retained this morning." "Yes, Your Honor." "We respectfully request a continuance to properly review." "Denied. Your client is alleged to have abandoned his wife in a dangerous situation last night. Time is of the essence." She turned to Sophia. "Counselor, you may present your evidence." Sophia stood, her movements smooth and confident. "Your Honor, at approximately 8:47 p.m. yesterday, Richard Mitchell deliberately abandoned his wife at a remote rest stop 42 miles from their home during a severe weather warning. We have an audio recording of the entire incident. She played the recording on the courtroom's speaker system. Richard's voice, cold and contemptuous, filled the space. "You need to learn a lesson, Clara. Maybe walking home will teach you a little respect." I watched Richard's face drain of all color. Croft leaned in, whispering furiously, but Richard just shook his head, gesturing wildly with his hands. "Furthermore," Sophia continued, "Mr. Mitchell has been systematically concealing marital assets for the past 18 months. We have documentation of offshore accounts in the Bahamas totaling $8 million and evidence that he has embezzled $3.2 million from his own hedge fund." "Objection!" Croft shot to his feet. "These are unsubstantiated and inflammatory allegations." "Then let's substantiate them," Sophia replied calmly, producing a thick stack of bank records. "Exhibits A through F, Your Honor. Wire transfers to accounts in the Bahamas, all initiated by Mr. Mitchell without his wife's knowledge or consent." Judge Vance reviewed the documents, her expression growing darker with every page she turned. "Mr. Mitchell, did you abandon your wife last night?" Richard stood, attempting to straighten his tie. "Your Honor, it was a misunderstanding. My wife and I had a fight." "It's a yes or no question, Mr. Mitchell. I left her at a rest stop, but during a storm? 42 miles from home? She had her phone. She could have called someone." The judge's eyebrows shot up. "How very considerate of you. Please continue, counselor." Sophia then pulled up financial records on the large courtroom screen. Mr. Mitchell has also been engaged in an extramarital affair with his assistant, Chloe Rodriguez, using marital funds to finance trips and purchase lavish gifts. This includes a pearl necklace valued at $12,000, which was reported as stolen for an insurance claim, but was, in fact, given to Miss Rodriguez. My phone buzzed. A text from Leo. "He's here." The courtroom doors swung open and Tom Chin from the SEC strode in, flanked by 2 federal agents. Richard's head snapped around, and for the very first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Your Honor," Tom Chin said, addressing the judge, "my apologies for the interruption. We have a warrant for the arrest of Richard Mitchell on charges of wire fraud and embezzlement." Croft was on his feet again. "Your Honor, this is completely out of order. So is stealing $3.2 million from your clients," Judge Vance retorted dryly. She looked at the federal agents. "Gentlemen, please wait until we have concluded this hearing. Mr. Mitchell isn't going anywhere." Richard collapsed back into his chair. His phone, which was sitting on the defendant's table, lit up with a relentless barrage of calls. I could see the names flashing, his mother, his business partner James, and over, Chloe. Given the evidence presented, Judge Vance stated, "I am granting the emergency injunction. All marital assets are hereby frozen pending a full investigation. Mrs. Mitchell is awarded exclusive use of the marital home and temporary support of $10,000 per month. Mr. Mitchell, you are ordered to maintain a distance of 500 feet from your wife at all times." $10,000 a month? Richard exploded, jumping up despite Croft's attempt to haul him back down. "That's outrageous. She doesn't need—" "Mr. Mitchell, you abandoned your wife in a storm after concealing millions of dollars in assets. Frankly, I am being generous by not holding you in contempt of court right now. Sit down." As Richard slumped back into his chair, my phone rang. Jessica's name flashed on the screen. I declined the call, but she immediately called back. And again. Sophia leaned over. "You should be documenting those." I nodded, taking a screenshot of the call log. 17 missed calls from Jessica in the last hour, 43 from Richard since last night, 22 from his mother, even a few from numbers I didn't recognize, likely Richard's colleagues or clients who'd caught wind of the federal investigation. Tom Chin approached our table as the judge finalized her orders. "Mrs. Mitchell, we will require your full cooperation with our investigation. Your attorney mentioned you have additional evidence?" I nodded. 8 months of documentation, financial records, recordings, emails, everything. "Good. Your husband is looking at 15 to 20 years if he's convicted on all charges." Richard must have overheard because he suddenly lurched to his feet again, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this. You set me up. This whole thing was a trap." Judge Vance's gavel slammed down hard. "Mr. Mitchell, you will control yourself, or I will add contempt charges to your growing list of problems. She's been planning this," he raved, his composure completely shattered. "The recording, the documents. She knew I was going to leave her there." "So you admit to premeditated abandonment?" the judge asked coolly. Croft physically dragged Richard back into his seat, but the damage was done. Richard had just confessed in open court, in front of federal agents, to deliberately stranding me. As we were preparing to leave, Chloe burst through the courtroom doors, her designer dress wrinkled and her carefully styled hair in disarray. She scanned the room wildly until her eyes locked onto Richard. "You told me you were divorced," she shrieked across the courtroom. "You said the papers were already filed. You said she was crazy and making it all up." The judge sighed wearily. "Ma'am, please remove yourself from my courtroom." But Chloe wasn't finished. She held up her phone, waving it frantically. "I have texts and recordings. He promised we were getting married. He told me the money was all his." Tom Chin's eyes lit up. He approached Chloe with cautious interest. "Ma'am, we would very much like to have a word with you." Richard's destruction was total. His mistress was about to become a state's witness. His assets were frozen. Federal agents were waiting to take him into custody, and his carefully curated image had been demolished in under an hour. As we walked out, leaving Richard to be processed by the federal agents, my phone buzzed with one last message. It was from Eleanor, Richard's mother. "I hope you're satisfied, destroying a good man over petty jealousy." I deleted it without a second thought. Eleanor would soon learn her son wasn't a good man. He was a criminal who had been caught, and I wasn't the one who had destroyed him. He had done that all by himself. The courthouse steps were swarming with reporters when we came out. Someone had leaked the story, probably a court clerk who recognized Richard's name from the society pages. Microphones were shoved in our faces as Sophia expertly guided me through the throng, her hand a firm presence on my elbow. "Mrs. Mitchell, is it true your husband embezzled millions?" "Clara, how long were you planning this? Will you be pressing further charges?" Sophia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "My client will not be making any statements at this time. There is an ongoing federal investigation." We pushed our way to Leo's truck, and I caught sight of a local news van setting up across the street. By the evening broadcast, Richard's face would be on every channel in Chicago. The golden boy of the city's hedge fund scene, arrested for fraud and embezzlement. His mother must be apoplectic. Back at the hotel, I sank onto the couch while Sophia poured us both a glass of water. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since we'd left the courthouse. I scrolled through the messages, a strange mix of shock, support, and judgment. A text from my hairdresser. "Just saw the news. Good for you, honey. From one of Richard's golfing buddies, this has to be some kind of misunderstanding, right? Richard would never do what they're saying. From 3 different neighbors, all variations of, we always knew there was something off about him." The most intriguing message, however, came from James Morrison, Richard's business partner. "Clara, we need to talk. There are things about the fund you should know, things that weren't in the federal complaint." Sophia read it over my shoulder, set up a meeting, and record every word. At 4 o'clock, the local news led with the story. The headline crawled across the bottom of the screen: "Prominent hedge fund manager arrested for embezzlement, following spousal abandonment incident." They already had Richard's mugshot. He looked gaunt and haggard, his usually perfect hair a mess, his designer suit replaced with standard-issue jail scrubs. A reporter was standing in front of our house, my house now, describing the scandal in breathless detail. Sources close to the investigation report that Richard Mitchell allegedly abandoned his wife during last night's severe storm, leaving her stranded 42 miles from home. This morning, federal agents arrested Mitchell on charges of embezzling $3.2 million from client accounts. His wife, Clara Mitchell, could not be reached for comment. My phone rang, Jessica again. This time, I answered. Clara, please, I need to explain. You told him about Mom's will, about the trust fund Dad set up, about her diagnosis. There was silence on the other end. Then, quietly, he said he was trying to help. He said you were too stressed to handle the information, that he wanted to protect you. He paid off your gambling debts. I didn't know what he was planning. I thought he loved you. He seemed so concerned, so caring. He said you were fragile, that you needed guidance. I thought about all the times Jessica had called over the past year, asking what seemed like innocent questions. How's Mom holding up? Have you talked to her lawyer lately? Remember that property Dad bought up in Wisconsin? Each conversation had been an intelligence-gathering mission for Richard. He played you, I said flatly, just like he played everyone else. Clara, I'm so sorry. When I saw the news, when I realized what he'd actually done, I've been sick all day. Can we please meet? Sophia shook her head, but something in Jessica's voice made me hesitate. She sounded genuinely broken, not just afraid of the consequences. Tomorrow, a neutral location. You come alone. After I hung up, Leo pulled up social media on his laptop. You need to see this. Richard's company Facebook page was in a state of total collapse. Clients were flooding the comments, demanding their money back. Former employees were sharing stories of suspicious activities they had witnessed. One woman wrote, "He fired me last year when I questioned some missing funds. Now I know why." But the most devastating blow came from Chloe. She had gone nuclear on her Instagram account, posting screenshots of their text exchanges, photos from their lavish trips funded by stolen money, and a long, detailed caption about how Richard had manipulated her into believing I was the villain. He told me his wife was emotionally disturbed, she wrote, that she refused to grant him a divorce and threatened to ruin him if he left. I believed every single word because he was so convincing, so sophisticated. I was a fool, but he was a master manipulator. The photos were damning. Richard and Chloe in first-class seats to Paris, raising champagne glasses. Richard and Chloe at the exact same resort in Mexico where he and I had celebrated our 5th anniversary. Richard and Chloe in our bed. She'd actually posted that one, though Instagram took it down within minutes. By 6 p.m., Richard's mother, Eleanor, had released a statement through her lawyer. Sophia read it aloud, barely suppressing her laughter. The Mitchell family is shocked and appalled by these allegations. We believe this is a coordinated and vicious attack orchestrated by a vindictive spouse seeking financial gain. Richard Mitchell is an upstanding member of the community who has been victimized by a calculating woman who married him for his wealth. She's really sticking with that narrative? Leo asked in disbelief. After what the whole world heard him say in court? My phone rang again, a number I didn't recognize. Against Sophia's advice, I answered, "Mrs. Mitchell? This is Patricia Huang from the Wall Street Journal. We're working on a feature story about systemic fraud in boutique hedge funds. Your husband's case is part of a larger pattern we've been investigating. Would you be willing to share your experience?" Sophia took the phone. "This is Clara Mitchell's attorney. All press inquiries should be directed to my office." She hung up and turned to me. "By tomorrow, this will be a national story. Richard didn't just ruin himself. He's taking down an entire network of corrupt fund managers. The FBI is expanding their investigation." I walked to the window and looked out at the glittering city lights. Somewhere in a federal holding cell, Richard was probably meeting with Croft, desperately trying to figure out a way to spin this. But there's no spinning video evidence, recorded confessions, and millions of dollars in stolen money. My phone lit up with one last message. It was from David Brennan, Richard's biggest client. "Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that several of us victims are pursuing civil suits against your husband. However, we want to be clear. You are not our target. We know that you are a victim, too. In fact, we would like you to testify about what you observed. The irony was almost too perfect. Richard had spent years telling me I was too stupid to understand finance, too naive to grasp the world of business. Now his former clients wanted my testimony to help put him away for good. As the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I realized that Richard's public humiliation was only just beginning. Tomorrow would bring more headlines, more revelations, more people stepping forward with their own stories about the man who had betrayed their trust. But tonight, for the first time in 3 long years, I sat in peaceful silence, no longer afraid of his footsteps, his moods, or his cruel words designed to keep me small. The man who had abandoned me in the rain had created his own storm, and now he was drowning in it. The next morning, there was a knock at my hotel door that I wasn't expecting. I looked through the peephole and saw Jessica standing in the hallway, her normally put-together appearance completely gone. Her hands were trembling as she clutched a large manila envelope, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. I opened the door but blocked the entrance. I thought we agreed to meet at a neutral location. I couldn't wait. "Clara, please, there are things you need to know right now, before the FBI interviews me this afternoon." Leo appeared in the doorway of the adjoining suite on high alert. I gave him a slight nod to let him know it was okay, then stepped aside to let Jessica in. She perched on the edge of the couch, placing the envelope on the coffee table as if it were a live bomb. "Richard first contacted me 13 months ago," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "He knew about the gambling. I have no idea how he found out, but he knew I owed $47,000 to some very unforgiving people. He offered to pay it all off, no strings attached, if I just answered a few questions about our family's finances." "And you agreed," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I was desperate. They were threatening to go to my boss to ruin my entire career. Richard made it seem like he genuinely wanted to help. He said you were too proud to ask Mom and Dad for money, that he wanted to surprise you by fixing our family's problems behind the scenes. She opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of printed emails. "These are all of our conversations, every single one. I printed them all last night after I realized what he was really doing." I picked up the first email, dated over a year ago. Richard's tone was warm, concerned, almost brotherly. He wrote about wanting to be a better husband, about needing to understand my family dynamics so he could be more supportive. The manipulation was sickeningly masterful. He was especially interested in Mom, Jessica continued. He wanted to know everything about her health, her mental state, her finances. I thought he was planning something nice for her, like arranging for better in-home care. "You told him about the Alzheimer's?" Jessica nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "She made me promise not to tell you. She didn't want you to worry, said you had enough on your plate with Richard being so demanding. But he was so persistent, so caring. He said he'd noticed some signs himself and just wanted to help." I kept reading. The emails showed Richard's questions becoming more and more specific over time. What properties did our parents own? Were there any trusts set up? Who was the executor of their wills? Jessica had answered every question, believing she was helping her brother-in-law take better care of our family. "Last month, he asked me to get Mom to sign some papers," Jessica said, her voice cracking. "He told me they were for insurance purposes, to protect her assets if her condition got worse. I actually took them to her, Clara. Thank God her lawyer was there that day. He recognized them as property transfer documents. That's when I finally started to realize something was seriously wrong." My phone buzzed. It was David Brennan. I put him on speaker so Leo could listen. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry to bother you, but this is urgent. I've been digging through our client files all night. Richard wasn't just stealing from the general fund. He was specifically targeting our elderly clients, particularly widows." "What do you mean, targeted?" "Take Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, for example. Her husband passed away 2 years ago and left her everything, with specific instructions for Richard to personally manage her portfolio. Within 6 months, Richard had convinced her to sign over power of attorney. She thought she was just giving him authority to make trades on her behalf. He used it to drain her accounts. I felt a wave of nausea. Eleanor Hartley was 78 years old. I'd met her at several company functions, a sweet woman who always lit up when she talked about her grandchildren. How much did he take from her? $800,000. But here's the most sickening part. He convinced her she was developing memory problems, that she was forgetting conversations where she'd supposedly authorized large withdrawals. He gaslit an elderly woman into thinking she had dementia. Leo was already taking notes, documenting every word for Sophia. This completely changed the scope of the case. Richard wasn't just a white-collar criminal. He was a predator who specifically hunted the most vulnerable. "I have recordings," David continued. "I started secretly recording our partnership meetings 2 years ago when I noticed some serious discrepancies. I was building a case to take to the authorities, but I was scared. Richard had connections everywhere. But now that he's in custody, I'm ready to provide everything I have." After I hung up with David, Jessica pulled one last document from her envelope. There's something else about Dad's estate. Our father had passed away 5 years ago, leaving what we believed was a modest inheritance split between us. But the paper she handed me was something different. It was a trust account in my name alone, established the year before he died. "He knew about my gambling even back then," Jessica said quietly. "He loved me, but he didn't trust me with a large sum of money. So he set this up just for you, with Mom as the trustee. It's worth about $2 million. Richard found out about it through me, and he's been trying to get his hands on it for months." I stared at the document, my head spinning. $2 million that my father had hidden away to protect it from both Jessica's addiction and, unknowingly, from my husband's greed. The account was held at a small private bank in Wisconsin, one Richard never would have known about without Jessica's help. "We need to go see Mom," Jessica said urgently. "Today. She's been holding on to something for you, something she wouldn't even tell me about. She said she was waiting for the right moment." An hour later, we were sitting in my mother's room at the memory care facility. She was having one of her increasingly rare lucid days, her eyes bright and focused as she clutched my hand. "I knew what he was the first time I met him," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "The way he looked around our house, like he was cataloging assets. The way he always steered the conversation back to money. Your father saw it too." She reached into her bedside table and pulled out a small ornate key. "Safety deposit box. First National Bank on Hennepin. Your father put some things in there for you the week before he passed away. Documents, evidence." "Evidence of what, Mom?" "Richard tried to forge your signature last year. Loan applications, property transfers. The bank manager was a good friend of your father's. He called me and sent me copies of everything. It's all in that box." I took the key, feeling its weight in my palm. My father had been protecting me even from beyond the grave. And my mother, despite her fading memory, had been standing guard over that protection. "There's more," Mom said, her grip on my hand tightening. "The FBI came to see me yesterday, not about Richard's arrest, but about something bigger. They said his name came up in an investigation that's been going on for 3 years. A whole network of fund managers who have been systematically defrauding elderly clients across 5 states. The room suddenly felt airless. Richard's abandonment of me wasn't just about cruelty or control. He knew the FBI was closing in. He wanted me broken and compliant because he thought he could use me as either a shield or a scapegoat when his world finally collapsed. He never expected you to fight back, my mother said, a small, proud smile on her face. Men like him never do. They mistake kindness for weakness. They're always shocked when they find out otherwise. As we prepared to leave, my mother squeezed my hand one last time. Your father would be so proud of you. You're so much stronger than Richard ever imagined. Driving away from the facility with Jessica beside me and Leo following in his truck, I thought about the intricate web of deception Richard had woven. Each new revelation peeled back another layer of his depravity. He wasn't just a bad husband or a corrupt fund manager. He was the spider at the center of a vast network of financial abuse that had ruined dozens of lives. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had assumed the woman he left stranded in the rain would stay there, broken and defeated. Instead, she had become the storm that would wash away everything he had built on the suffering of others. The First National Bank on Hennepin stood like a fortress of old money and even older secrets. Jessica waited in the car while Leo escorted me inside to the climate-controlled vault where the safety deposit box my mother had protected for so long was waiting. The bank manager, a kind-faced man named Mr. Paulson, remembered my father fondly and handled the key with the reverence of someone who knew he was part of something important. Inside the box lay a stack of documents that made my hands tremble. Forged loan applications bearing my signature, dated 6 months ago. Property transfer papers for my grandmother's lake house, which Richard had apparently tried to sell without my knowledge. Bank statements from accounts I'd never seen, opened in my name but with all correspondence directed to a P.O. box he controlled. My father had somehow obtained copies of it all, his familiar handwriting on sticky notes explaining the significance of each document. One note attached to a forged power of attorney document simply said, "He will try to take everything. Don't let him." Leo photographed every single page while I sat there in stunned silence. The sheer scope of Richard's betrayal just kept expanding. This wasn't just about our marriage or even the millions he'd stolen. He had been systematically working to erase my financial identity, either to make me completely dependent on him or, even worse, to frame me for his own crimes if it became necessary. 4 months later, I walked into the federal courthouse for the first day of Richard's criminal trial. The media frenzy had only grown since his arrest. News vans lined the street, and reporters shouted questions I ignored. I wore a charcoal gray suit that had never seen the inside of our shared closet, bought specifically for this moment. It was professional, dignified, and expensive enough to send a clear message. I was not broken. Richard sat at the defendant's table in a suit that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight in federal custody, and his once perfect hair was growing out awkwardly. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I gave him a small, serene smile. It was the same smile I used to give him over morning coffee when he would lecture me about my spending. But now, that smile was heavy with the weight of everything I knew, and everything he knew I was about to reveal. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres, laid out his case with methodical precision. 12 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of elder abuse, 1 count of conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The evidence was a mountain: doctored books, hidden accounts, forged documents, and the recorded conversations where Richard explicitly discussed stealing from his clients. For 11 days, witness after witness took the stand. Elderly clients described in heartbreaking detail how Richard had charmed them into signing documents they didn't understand. Former employees testified about being ordered to falsify records. The forensic accountant walked the jury through the complex labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies Richard had created. On day 12, the courtroom doors opened and Chloe Rodriguez walked in. She looked nothing like the polished young woman who had once worn my grandmother's pearls. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a conservative dress. Her elaborate hairstyle had been traded for a simple bun. She'd been granted full immunity in exchange for her testimony, and she was about to bury Richard for good. "Ms. Rodriguez," the prosecutor began, "how long were you romantically involved with the defendant?" 18 months, Chloe answered, her voice quiet but steady. "And during that time, did Mr. Mitchell ever discuss his business practices with you?" "Yes, frequently." He thought it was funny to explain how he was moving money around without anyone noticing. He called it playing three-dimensional chess while everyone else was playing checkers. She produced recordings from her phone, conversations where Richard bragged about targeting elderly clients, about hiding money from me, about his plans to disappear to Costa Rica once he'd saved up enough. In one recording, his voice was chillingly clear. Clara's the perfect cover. Sweet, trusting, never asks any questions. By the time she figures out what's happening, I'll be long gone and she'll be left holding the bag. But Chloe's most devastating revelation came near the end of her testimony. 3 weeks before his arrest, Richard told me he was planning to leave me too. He had another woman in Costa Rica, someone he'd met online. He was going to abandon me, just like he abandoned his wife. The look on Richard's face was worth every single moment of pain he had ever caused me. His jaw dropped, and his attorney whispered frantically in his ear, but the damage was done. His own mistress had just revealed that he had been playing everyone, including her. The next day brought another bombshell. A young man named Christopher Walsh took the stand. He was 22 years old, with Richard's same sharp jawline and calculating eyes. The prosecutor quickly established his identity: Richard's son from a college relationship, a son whose existence Richard had hidden for over 2 decades. My mother has been receiving payments from Richard Mitchell for 22 years, Christopher testified. $1,500 a month to keep quiet about my existence. She has records showing the money came directly from his client accounts. I watched Richard physically shrink in his chair as Christopher continued. He told my mother that if she ever contacted his family or went public, he would destroy her reputation and make sure she never worked in finance again. She has that threat in writing. The prosecutor introduced 22 years of bank records, showing regular payments from the very same accounts Richard had been pillaging. He had been stealing from elderly clients not just for a life of luxury and a grand escape, but to hide the skeletons of his past. Richard's defense attorney tried to object, arguing that this was prejudicial and irrelevant to the financial crimes, but Judge Vance overruled him. It establishes a pattern of deception and financial malfeasance that spans the defendant's entire adult life. On the final day of testimony, Richard made the catastrophic error of taking the stand himself. Against his attorney's visible protests, he walked to the witness box, still possessed by the arrogant belief that he could talk his way out of anything. For 2 hours, he tried to spin a narrative in which he was the victim. He claimed I'd known about his affairs and had given my tacit approval. He insisted his elderly clients had authorized every single transaction. He portrayed himself as a brilliant financial mind who had simply made a few unfortunate bookkeeping errors. Then, the prosecutor began his cross-examination, and Richard's composure cracked like a sheet of thin ice. When confronted with the recordings, he claimed they were taken out of context. When shown the forged documents, he had the audacity to suggest that I might have created them. When presented with the evidence of the hush money paid to Christopher's mother, he actually said, "That was a personal matter, unrelated to my business." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. As the foreman stood to read the verdict, I held Leo's hand on one side and Sophia's on the other. On count 1, wire fraud, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On count 2, wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. By the time they reached the 15th and final count, Richard had buried his head in his hands. Guilty on all charges. The man who had left me in the rain 42 miles from home was about to find out what real abandonment felt like. 2 weeks later, we returned for sentencing. Judge Vance, the same woman who had presided over our emergency hearing months ago, looked down at Richard with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Mitchell, you preyed upon the most vulnerable members of our society. You betrayed the trust of your clients, your colleagues, and your family. You have shown absolutely no remorse, accepting no responsibility, even when confronted with a mountain of irrefutable evidence. This court hereby sentences you to 96 months in federal prison, without the possibility of early release. 8 years. Richard would spend 8 years of his life behind bars. As the bailiffs prepared to lead him away, he turned and looked at me one last time. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. I stood up and spoke clearly, knowing the courtroom microphones would pick up every word. "You're right. The civil suits start next month." The bailiffs led Richard away in shackles, and I walked out of the courthouse into a crisp September afternoon that felt like the first day of spring. The civil suits would indeed start next month, with 17 of Richard's victims seeking restitution. But that was Sophia's battlefield now. I had something far more important to build. The whistleblower reward came through 6 weeks after Richard's sentencing. $1.2 million for providing the information that led to the recovery of stolen funds. Combined with the assets the court had awarded me and the trust fund my father had so wisely protected, I suddenly had the resources to do something meaningful with the pain Richard had inflicted. Leo found the building. It was a renovated Victorian in Chicago's Whittier neighborhood that had previously been a law firm. It had 3 stories, 8 offices, a conference room large enough for group sessions, and most importantly, multiple discreet exits, something women escaping dangerous situations would desperately need. We signed the lease on a Thursday. By Monday, the Haven Initiative had a home. "We'll need a state-of-the-art security system," Leo said, walking through the empty rooms with his tablet, making notes. Panic buttons in every office, secured entry points, and surveillance that actually protects people instead of monitoring them. Isabel arrived with boxes of filing systems and encryption software. I've already had 3 forensic accountants reach out wanting to volunteer their services. Word is spreading in the financial community about what we're building here. Sophia had taken a leave of absence from her high-powered firm to help us establish our legal aid program. "We need to be extremely careful about how we structure this," she said, spreading incorporation documents across the conference table. "We're going to be dealing with dangerous situations, angry spouses, and potential legal retaliation. Everything has to be absolutely bulletproof." Within a month, we had our first client. Her name was Maria, a teacher whose husband had hidden their life savings and was threatening to report her to immigration services if she tried to leave, even though she was a naturalized citizen. Isabel found the money. Sophia filed the papers. Leo arranged for safe transportation, and I sat with Maria while she cried, remembering my own tears in that hotel room on the night Richard abandoned me. Jessica showed up at the foundation on a rainy Tuesday 3 months sober, carrying a box of donuts as a peace offering. "I want to help," she said simply. "I know what it feels like to be manipulated, to be so desperate you betray the people you love. Maybe I can help others see the warning signs before it's too late." We started her out as a volunteer, answering phones and filing paperwork. But Jessica had a natural gift for talking to the women who called in a state of crisis. She understood desperation and shame in a way that even trained counselors sometimes couldn't. Within 6 months, she was running our support groups, sharing her own story of how Richard had exploited her addiction, helping other women recognize when they were being used. My mother came to visit on one of her good days, with Leo driving her carefully through the city she had once known so well. She sat in my office looking at the framed photos on the walls, pictures of women who had given us permission to share their success stories, faces beaming with pride as they stood in front of new apartments, at graduation ceremonies, with children they had managed to keep safe. "Your father would be so proud," she said, her hand gently touching a photo of a woman who had escaped with her 3 children and was now in nursing school. "He always said the best revenge against cruelty is to show kindness to others." She pulled an envelope from her purse. "This came to the house. I thought you should see it." Inside was a newspaper clipping from the prison newsletter. Richard had been elected treasurer of the inmates' investment club. Even behind bars, he was still trying to maintain his facade as a financial genius. I almost laughed at the sheer absurdity of it. The most surprising volunteer arrived 7 months after the trial. Chloe Rodriguez stood in our reception area, looking nothing like the woman who had once flaunted my grandmother's pearls. She'd cut her hair short, traded her designer clothes for simple slacks and a button-down shirt, and carried herself with a humility I never would have thought possible. "I've been in therapy," she said, sitting across from me in my office, "working through how I got involved with someone like Richard, why I ignored all the red flags, and why I participated in hurting you. I know I can never undo what I did, but maybe I can help prevent other young women from making the same mistakes." She started by speaking at local colleges, warning business students about older men in positions of power who promise career advancement in exchange for companionship. She was brutally honest about her own choices, taking full responsibility while also explaining the gradual process of manipulation that had made those choices seem reasonable at the time. "He made me feel special," she told a group of graduate students one evening, "like I was smarter and more sophisticated than any other woman my age. By the time I realized I was just another pawn in his game, I was in too deep to see a way out." 1 year after Richard's sentencing, a letter arrived at the foundation. His handwriting was still impeccably perfect, even on cheap prison stationery. It was 4 pages of pure vitriol, blaming me for his downfall, claiming I had orchestrated everything from the very beginning, that I had entrapped him. He listed every perceived slight. Every moment he now believed had been part of my grand plan. The final line read, "I hope you learned your lesson." I had the letter professionally framed and hung it on my office wall, right next to my degrees and certifications. When clients would ask about it, I would tell them the truth. Yes, I had learned my lesson. I had learned that when someone shows you who they are through their cruelty, you should believe them. I had learned that patience and meticulous planning can overcome years of abuse. And most importantly, I had learned that the best response to someone trying to break you is to become unbreakable, and then use that strength to lift up others. 18 months after that night at the rest stop, I stood in my office looking at a wall covered in thank you cards. 87 women had found safety and a new beginning through the Haven Initiative. Some had needed only legal advice and financial forensics. Others had required complete extraction plans with safe houses and new identities. Each one had arrived broken in some way, convinced they were trapped and that their situation was hopeless. Eleanor Hartley, the widow Richard had defrauded, had become our biggest donor. She recovered most of her money through the civil suits and insisted on funding our emergency shelter program. "That man tried to convince me I was losing my mind," she said at our first fundraising gala. "Clara showed me I was actually finding my strength." The rain was falling again outside, drumming a gentle rhythm against the windows of the old Victorian that now housed so much hope and so many second chances. I thought about that night, 42 miles from home, standing in the downpour as Richard drove away, so confident that he had finally broken me. He thought he was teaching me about power and control, about knowing my place. Instead, he taught me that cruelty inevitably creates its own destruction, that every action has consequences, and that sometimes the person you abandon in the rain has already seen the storm coming and is prepared accordingly. Through the Haven Initiative, his single act of calculated cruelty had become the catalyst for saving women he never believed were worthy of being saved. The ultimate lesson, the one Richard never saw coming, wasn't about obedience or respect. It was about transformation. He had tried to leave me powerless, and in doing so, had given me the power to save hundreds. End of story.